Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our attendees joining us today for this latest Data Science Central webinar. This is Bill Voorhees, your host. I'm the Editorial Director with Data Science Central and also Chief Data Scientist for Data Magnum. So I'd like to start off our event today by thanking CrowdFlower for sponsoring today's event. CrowdFlower is an integral supporter of the Data Science Central community, and we're honored to have them sponsoring our event today. I'd also like to take this opportunity to mention and show our appreciation for some other recent sponsors, including Alteryx, Tableau, Qubole, Dell Statistica, Exaptive, and Microsoft, to name just a few. So past webinars are available on demand at datasciencecentral.com. If you haven't had an opportunity to view them, I encourage you to take a look. They provide some very useful insight into a wide variety of topics of interest to our data science community. Today's webinar is entitled 4 Steps to Improve Search Relevance, Business Outcomes, and User Experience. And before we begin, I'd like to briefly review the format of today's webinar. Today's webinar will be an hour long. We'll have 3 presenters that I'll introduce in just a minute. There'll be 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A following the presentation, and this event is being recorded and will be available on datasciencecentral.com later this afternoon following today's live event. Now, I'd also like to encourage our attendees to provide questions throughout the presentation, as we'll be reviewing and presenting them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of today's event. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce today's speakers, Lucas Bewald of CrowdFlower, Andy Edmonds of Adobe, and Jamie DeLong of Etsy. Now, Lucas Bewald is the founder and CEO of CrowdFlower, and that was founded in 2009. CrowdFlower is a data enrichment platform that taps into on-demand to workforce to help companies collect, clean, and label data to make it more useful. Lucas is a graduate of Stanford University with a BS in mathematics and an MS in computer science. He led the search relevance team for Yahoo Japan and worked as a senior data scientist on the ranking and management team at PowerSet. Recently, Lucas won the Net Explorateur Award for GiveWork, a collaboration with Samasource that brings digital work to refugees worldwide. Now, Andy Edmonds is a technology leader specializing in guiding teams in continuous learning to deliver business results. Starting his working career as a webmaster in 1995 and participating in the early blogging community, he has a huge breadth of experience in user experience, e-commerce, web analytics, online experimentation, online research, data science, information retrieval, and software development methods. Now, Jamie DeLong is Senior Product Manager leading Discovery at Etsy. She works with artistic and technical minds, making it easier to explore nearly 40 million items from creative, independent businesses around the world. So, thanks for being with us today, Lucas, Andy, Jamie. We're looking forward to your presentation. As most data scientists and search architects know, the process of improving search relevance is never truly done. Visitors that search within e-commerce sites are 2 or 3 times more likely to convert than those who don't, meaning that it's essential to deliver those users a quality experience and relevant results. Doing this requires continued maintenance and improvement of your search relevance algorithms. So in today's Data Science Central webinar, you'll learn from CrowdFlower and its customers, Adobe and Etsy, 4 techniques for improving your search relevant practices, business outcomes, and user experiences covering measurement, incorporating human-labeled data, improving your search filtering use interface, and ranking features. So, Lucas, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can begin as soon as you're ready to go.
Thanks for that introduction, Bill. I really appreciate it. And it's great to be here with Andy and Jamie. I'm the founder of CrowdFlower, and as you mentioned, we help our customers make data useful, in particular helping data scientists collect training data and then do human-in-the-loop machine learning on top of that. But I feel especially passionate about search because before I worked at CrowdFlower, I ran a search team at PowerSet, which became Microsoft Bing, and worked on search relevance at Yahoo. And so I've always worked on search and improving relevance throughout my career. And one of the things I really love about it is that it's very tangible, right? So everybody can understand how frustrating it is when search relevance doesn't work. And Andy works today at Adobe on an image search product where you can go in and you can search for stock photos, and he tries to return high-quality photos, which I think many of us have done. Before that, he worked at eBay, where he worked on improving the search quality, and he actually told me that he grew the search revenue by over $500 million in his tenure at eBay. And then before that, he actually worked at Microsoft when, in 2004, he built perhaps the largest corpus of labeled search relevance data at the time. So deep expertise, and he's also, I should mention, a prolific author of academic papers on search relevance and human annotation. And in particular, he had a really interesting paper that he recently put out about the velocity of clicks and how fast somebody clicks on something predicts what they think about the topic, how sure they are in their answer. So look up Andy. He's a really interesting guy, and I'm looking for a whole bunch of really specific examples today. I've really enjoyed the rehearsal and learning from him. And then Jamie is another longtime CrowdFlower customer and search expert. She's a group product manager at Etsy, where she works on the Etsy search relevance and improving it in various ways. And it's something that I can relate to as a longtime Etsy customer. I love shopping on Etsy, and I've noticed that the search has improved over time. And one of the big things that she did was actually improving the taxonomy, so you can find things better and automatically classifying the things that their user base uploads. And she mentioned that not only increased engagement by over 10%, but it led to SEO gains. So not only did it make a better experience for existing customers, but it made more customers come to Etsy. So, again, search relevance is this great use case of data science where it leads to more revenue and happier customers. With that, I've kind of said it, I guess, in my words, but, Jamie, I'd love to hear your take on why you think search relevance matters.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for the great introduction. I'm really happy to be here today talking about search relevance. Specifically at Etsy, search has always been the heart of the shopping experience. As much as we try to merchandise or push forward our content in sort of traditional e-commerce ways, our sellers who are making new things and our buyers who are looking for things that they can't get anywhere else are always 3, 4, or 5 steps ahead of us. So search has always been really the main tool for discovery. So we can't keep up with the inventory or the intent of our users. So for us, it's been really sort of a challenge of figuring out how to help people find things without putting too much of a burden on the user. As much as people love searching, and if you've ever shopped on Etsy, there's sort of a nice I did it myself. Shopping is like a creative experience because you're putting in the keywords. You're the one sort of formulating the space for yourself. That can be really fun, but it can also be a ton of work, and it's really easy for people to give up along the way. So we try to do our best to give people information they need to be able to inflect on their next search, to be able to understand the space. And really at Etsy, search is I think more than a lot of other e-commerce sites even, it's a discovery tool and a navigation tool rather than just a specific, sort of recalling a specific item or having one correct answer for the query.
And Andy, you've had a unique opportunity to work on several different, very high-profile search engines throughout your career. Has relevance been defined differently, or has it mattered differently to the different organizations that you've worked for?
Sure. Well, the eBay experience was particularly unique given the breadth of inventory. There we really learned a delta between relevance and sellability, largely due to kind of supply-demand imbalances and the availability of low-priced items. And in particular, you could sell more but decrease engagement. People make this critical judgment above the fold of their likelihood of success. And if you put all under $10 Bluetooth headsets there, and somebody's actually looking for a name brand, they're just not going to think you have the right inventory. So we also saw that we had to pay attention to total revenue as well as total sales. The interesting thing is the metrics have actually tended to be pretty common. The metrics that work in one system have tended to work in all of them, which is nice.
Interesting, but I think one of the things you said, so there's a difference between optimizing for relevance and optimizing for the amount of sales that come through, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like it should be the same thing, but I guess it's a little bit different.
Well, so I mean, diversity is one example, right? There is a what was the example? There's a RV that shares a name with a brand of jeans, and so somebody types in the name. If they want the RV, you have to figure out how you're going to clue them into the fact that you have that, while still making sure that you show the person who wants the jeans a great pair of jeans.
Gotcha. Good example. So why don't we try a poll question here? So we were wondering for all the folks out there, do you use machine learning at your company? And this helps us gauge a little bit the type of audience that we're talking with. So hopefully you guys can see the question live, and we'll click on it. And are you ready for the results? Whoa, all right, it's about 50-50. So okay, about half the folks in the audience using machine learning. So I kind of predicted that, so we're going to try to use a combination of kind of multiple levels here, right? So we want to make sure you walk away with the kind of general understanding of search relevance, but also get relevant details that are actually useful for your job. So why don't we jump into measurement? And Andy, I think, was alluding to that. Talking about kind of the difference between measuring, kind of measuring revenue and measuring relevance. But Jamie, maybe you could talk about specifically kind of what you measure at Etsy and what are important metrics to you.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So at Etsy, most of the metrics that we're looking at have historically been behavioral metrics. So we are really well known for A/B testing and sort of data-driven development. When we didn't have a lot of people or a lot of funds, it was really easy to sort of bootstrap that system, and we relied really heavily on it over the years. So right now we look a lot at clicks. Clicks per. We think about it as, did they click on anything in the result set, or did they even click on anything during a visit? We think about those as sort of our baseline user success metrics. Generally, at a high level, we're always optimizing for conversion. So we're trying to get people to buy something, anything. And we don't so much specifically look at things like revenue, like Andy was saying. He looked at it at eBay. We're much simpler in sort of our definition of a successful visit. Part of that is because we're trying to make our sellers successful, and Etsy doesn't really make any. Our margins are the same on everything. So other e-commerce sites, people I've talked to at other e-commerce sites, will put a thing that they have a higher they have a higher profit margin on toward the beginning of the result set. We don't do that at all. We do diversify the results, also, like Andy was saying. So when we're looking at an experiment that we might run ahead of time, we run a whole suite of tests to see if we think this is going to be a successful experiment or not. So in that, things that we'll look at are where items that people clicked on in the past moved higher up in the result set or lower down. That's a really good sort of early indicator, but it has some drawbacks. Specifically, if an item was never shown in the past, we don't know if people are going to click on it or not. We don't have any information about it. We also look at the diversity of shops. So we try to make sure that the results on the first page really convey the breadth of the inventory. So we don't want all of the scarves that you're seeing to be crocheted and look like they're exactly from the same seller. So we make sure that you see a breadth of shops on the first page. We'll also, obviously look at latency. We try to look at how much the results have changed overall, mostly because we don't want to do something completely radical that shifts the sales drastically for a population of our sellers, we try to make changes in a more gradual way to not upset the seller side of our marketplace, which we're very invested in keeping engaged and happy. So that's sort of like from the behavioral side, we're looking at clicks. Did they favorite an item? Did they look at an item for a long time? Did they buy an item? And we look at the clicks and the dwell time, which is did they stay on it for a long time? And the favorites as sort of early indicators of conversion. And then in order to get some confidence ahead of time, we also look at all of the other metrics I mentioned as part of our offline testing.
So that's interesting. So do you actually prefer someone to spend time on search results? Because I remember at Yahoo and PowerSet, it was web search, so we kind of thought that if people spent too much time on a page, that's bad. But I can imagine at Etsy it might be a fun experience to click around. Do you have a sense of, do you look for that metric to go up or down?
So the dwell time is actually on the listing page. So it's the next step after the click-through. So we're looking to see them spending some time looking at the listing.
Gotcha.
We don't measure how long they spent on the search results page.
Got it. And so Andy, how is that different from what you're doing at Adobe?
I think it's similar. The critical thing here is that depending upon the user's intent, it's hard to say whether clicking once or clicking on one result or three results is better. So if a user is just learning the space, they're considering a set of alternatives, maybe multiple items are the right thing. If they know exactly what they want, then you'd like them to find it and buy it on the first click. So that's why it's interesting we discovered that Jamie and I independently arrived at a metric of essentially search pages with clicks. Right, so the metric you'll often hear touted as CTR, which in a strict definition would be clicks over search page views. That's not a very clean metric, right? It's hard to interpret it unambiguously. Share of searches with a click is a much more pristine metric. Generally, if that goes down, that's not great. In my experience on that one, it's stable.
Explain the difference there. So I mean, it makes sense to me that people clicking more would mean that the search results are better. But now why so it sounds like you've both kind of come to the conclusion of this very specific metric, right, of does somebody click on what percent of the time does somebody click on any result? Mm-hmm. Right? And so could you maybe say why you kind of came to that conclusion? I think that'd be really interesting for our audience.
Well, I think the CTR metric is just noisier. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Oh, no, that's the same thing I was going to say.
There's lots of ways that one can move.
I see.
So say that you increase query specificity. So by doing query suggestions or some relevance ranking factor, you narrow the recall. You may actually decrease clicks, and that may be, but you may increase user success for a subset of people. On the other hand, you increase the diversity, and you get people to explore. It was funny. One of the things I did at eBay was look at people over a long period of time, and there was a guy who was a Kiss fan, so Kiss the band, but he loved to click on the random Kiss things that showed up at eBay, right? So he'd click on these giant marble red lips or whatever as he was going through his Kiss memorabilia.
Got it. So then it looked like good results to a naive metric, or it looked like interesting results that maybe should be put up. Right. Yeah. I see. Wow, and you're able to drill in and actually see an individual person's click history.
Yeah, let's not dwell on that one.
Fair enough. Creepy. All right, Andy, do you want to give your example at Adobe? Here, I can move the slide forward for you.
Sure. So we've talked about the click metrics. We're also I think we. This is actually Etsy's task, I think. So this is a sample human relevance metric task. So we use Judgment and CrowdFlower to both pre-qualify candidates and as a complementary metric to our A/B tests. So one of the beauties of crowdsourcing is you can test something before you've actually built it, right? You can kind of prototype it for a small number of queries and get some results. And then every time we do a release or even an A/B test, we do a judgment run. Here's an example from, and I've only been to Adobe since January. My first measurement hire starts the beginning of next month, so this code was built by me and doesn't live up to the Adobe aesthetic. But at the top you see a list of queries, performance across 4 variants, and then the second screen is a detailed view color-coded by our judgment scale. And so we've got a great answer at a score of 3, a good answer at a score of 2, a bad answer at a score of 1, and bad is meant to be plausible but not useful, where there's a 0, which is implausible. Like, why the heck did the computer think this was the right thing to do? So to date, in general, we see if we see a measurement win, or if we see we won't see a financial win unless we see a measurement win. And so the metric here is discounted cumulative gain. This one's fairly well documented on the web, but it's a standard information retrieval metric, and I'll give you a quick view into that. Gain is that score, right? So 3, 2, 1, or 0. Cumulative is that we're summing that score across, say, the top 10 results or the top 20 results. And discounted is that there's a light discount on the score based upon the position of the item in the results. You get full credit or for position 1, but a bad result at position 5 is more impactful than a bad result at position 10. That's what you're trying to do with that discount. And so you'll see DCG at position. We use 20 because image search is really, really fast. People scan images much more quickly than they do the web textual results, and we present more results above the fold. So 20 is essentially a fold and a half for for the average browser, and so that's why we're doing 20. And this is a pretty critical process. Go ahead.
At eBay, you might have looked at fewer results per query. Is that right?
Indeed. Typically, 10 or even 3 as a pretty clean diagnostic. Certainly that above the fold view is really important, right? People judge the quality of the results based upon what they see above the fold.
And maybe just stepping back for a second, so Jamie was talking about using, and actually you were also talking about using click data, which totally makes sense because at the end of the day, one of the things you're hoping to do is get people to click on results and then buy more things. But why are you incorporating human data at all?
Well, so the first answer is that A/B testing is not a resource you can get back, right? You've only got so much traffic. You've only got so much time. There's almost nothing in the world you can do to scale up that resource. You can hire more developers. You can hire more workers, but you can't get more A/B test traffic. So the success rate of A/B tests is also industry-wide remarkably low. And so everything that you can do to pre-qualify the candidates before you actually go out and use that expensive A/B test spectrum is high value. The other really nice notion is that the judgment data gives you diagnostics. You can go in and look at individual results for individual queries and troubleshoot why that bad item came up. And it gives you a rich database of those kinds of examples that you can use to drive product development.
Got it. So it sounds like one of the things you're doing is sort of pre-qualifying data before you actually run it live to real people. Right. Got it. And so
you
maybe
can even
you could
say that we're
bit...
preventing us from shipping. You could almost think of it as QE, even quality assurance.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And maybe you could say a little bit. Sorry to jump around your slides a little bit, but maybe you could say a little bit about how you think about what queries to show humans. So obviously with click data you get everybody clicking on stuff, but with human judgments you're actually picking the queries that you want to show to a human being to get labeled to create these metrics.
Right, and this slide is about a measurement set. So you might do a query set specifically focused on collecting data in an area where you want to improve, or an area where you've built a feature that's meant to be diagnostic for that specific thing that you're doing. This is an approach, a random sampling approach, to build the most representative set of queries, statistically speaking, that you can get so that you can go get a measurement data point and take it to your bosses and say, the data's in. This is good motivation to go do this. So what you do here, in order to get a statistically principled random sample, is you pull from your logs until you have X distinct queries. And what I've shown you here is the process of generating 500 unique queries at Adobe Stock. You can see the first query was pulled 3 times, and we pulled a couple of queries 2 times down to position 25. So with 500 queries, we sampled the head sampled the head 25 times. And so when you get the judgment data back, what you do is you do a weighted average based upon this frequency. And that's a statistically valid way of generating a weighted sample. You can't use the raw frequency. You have to use your sample frequency. And so the caveat here is that you may or may not be able to represent the breadth of your queries with this kind of random sample. So an alternative approach would be to do a stratified sample where you attempt to analyze all the critical dimensions that affect performance and then pick some queries from each of those buckets. So let's say you're an e-commerce site, you want some queries that belong to the men's category and women's and children. Knowing all those dimensions and doing that precisely is really hard. So I tend to rely on the random sample approach.
So you just literally, you look at your logs of queries and then pull randomly, and if you get the same query twice, you actually just count it twice. Is that right? Do you remove misspelled queries or anything like that? Or totally
Well, so there is an
exclude
column there. The number one thing that we do exclude typically, that I've typically excluded is the adult content and 0 result queries. Depending upon whether you're doing whole page judgment or pure ranking judgment, if you're doing whole page, then you really want to look at those misspellings. If you're doing relevance judgment, as we showed in the picture, yes, remove misspellings. So essentially there's a did you mean, the spelling flag is excluded from the sample, and then 0 result queries are also excluded.
Got it. And so then you get that big list of queries, and you pull the search results for each one of those queries, and then it sounds like you're asking people to judge if the search result is good or bad, right?
Right, and you missed a step in there, which is merging of the results and deduping. So one of the things that makes this sort of efficient and not too costly is you can test a slew of near neighbor algorithms. So the example I showed you used 4, but I've done 10 or 20 at a time, and the incremental cost of each additional algorithm tends to be pretty low because the number of distinct results is relatively low, right? Typically, those algorithms are going to share a fair number of results, so the cost goes up nonlinear, certainly slowly.
I see. So you're saying you could test different potential algorithms that actually isn't what you're running in production, and pull the queries or pull the results that they would bring up and get those judged and then compare.
Right. So in the measurement case, right, you've got a candidate and you've got a live site version. In the sort of development case, you could even be doing parameter fitting, where you have some new factor and you're trying to calibrate the degree to which you should use it, and you could even test 0.1 to 0.9 in 0.05 steps.
And so how does the results from, so you're asking humans to judge if a query is good or bad, and then you're also looking at click data and buying data. Do you ever get different results from the human labeled judgments versus the click data that you see?
It certainly happens, especially in e-commerce. I think it was maybe a little less often in web search. It's really hard to get workers to assess sellability. So when somebody's out there about to spend their hard-earned money, they put a lot of intellectual effort into that process, and they care, right, about those dollars. So price comparison is particularly a place where it can be difficult to generalize from judgment to site performance. On the other hand, relevance is a necessary but not sufficient condition for success. So I have very, very rarely, if ever, had a case that failed human judgment that won in the live site. The other case is certainly more prevalent, where you have a winner in human judgment, relevance goes up, but sellability does not necessarily go up.
Got it. That makes sense. So people can, it's easy to tell if, sorry, Jamie, did you want to jump in there?
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, we've seen that a lot, specifically with purchasability and not having all of the information available, especially when you're doing whole page relevance, not having all of the information necessary to make a purchasing decision on the search results page. So an example would be if we run a test and our raters, we run a test and people in Germany say don't buy things. They don't know whether or not the items, what the shipping cost is going to be from the search results page, and that ends up being a big factor in purchasing decision later on. So something might look really good from the search perspective, but later on fails because we're showing things that are very expensive to ship to Germany. So.
I see. So you both are sort of saying that relevance is a sufficient, but is a necessary but not sufficient condition for sellability, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we run another poll here? So has anyone run a measurement crowdsourcing job? I think everyone on the line here has, but let's ask our audience. I'm excited to see the results. And it looks like most people actually haven't run a measurement crowdsourcing job, so that's great. So you all should run a measurement crowdsourcing job, and let me know how it goes. I'd love to check it out, and hopefully this webinar helps you with that process and helps you understand how it could be useful for you. So actually, I wanted to hear from Jamie a little bit because she's running a different kind of human labeling task at Etsy that's been useful for her. So Jamie, maybe you could talk about how you use human labels.
Yeah, I would love to. So I'm going to skip around on the slides a little bit so I can set this up properly, I think. So one of the biggest problems with Etsy historically has been not being able to break down the result set. So like I was saying earlier, people come to the site, they don't really know what they want. They use search to explore the space. So this is I think this is a little bit tough to see. But this is Etsy pre-2015. I'm not exactly sure what the date is, but these are the search results for jewelry. Jewelry is probably constantly in our top 20 queries at Etsy. We sell a lot of jewelry, and people come to the site trying to buy a gift. Jewelry also, this is I think quite a long time ago, but jewelry has over 7 million results on Etsy. So that's incredibly overwhelming to your average shopper. And the chances of us showing somebody what they want for jewelry in that first, here there's 12 results, and the first 12 results are pretty slim. There's no algorithm that's going to show the perfect thing to every single visitor to the site for the query jewelry that will make them make a purchase right away. So we basically look at this query as a query that's asking for refinement. And when we started working on this problem, we had these categories over here you can see on the left-hand side that weren't mutually exclusive, that didn't really break down the result set in a meaningful way. So the big thing that you mentioned that we worked on last year was basically shifting from showing results and showing these sort of not meaningful refinements. So here you can see there's two different refinements of jewelry refinements for the query jewelry. One is handmade, one is vintage. In this universe, it was impossible to see all of the jewelry on Etsy at the same time, which is just sort of like a basic, very, very basic user need. So we worked on breaking that down into sort of meaningful groupings. So now when you search for jewelry on Etsy, we show you a much more exploratory treatment. So we're actually pushing you to refine your query by going down to the next level of necklaces, earrings, bracelets, rings, body jewelry, etc. So that's sort of a first step in making refinements more useful, and it works for the most low-intent queries. So things that are very, very broad or general. So something like orange, maybe you like the color and you're looking for things that are orange, or you're really into, say, Pokemon Go, and you want to see all of the fan art that's happening on Etsy. It doesn't at all work when somebody knows already that they want a necklace and they're trying to refine their query to have the different kinds of necklaces we have on Etsy. So we want to have more structured data on our listings, and we don't want to put the burden on our sellers to provide that structured data. A lot of our sellers have, hundreds of items. It takes a long time to go through each one and answer 5 or 6 questions. So we're working on a task with CrowdFlower to basically bootstrap that system. So we're building a model to detect specific attributes of an item. So these are beads. Here we're looking for the bead shape, the drill style, if it's for a specific holiday, and what materials it's made of. So basically a set of questions. And we're taking all of this unstructured information from the listing that isn't used in search results right now. So if I can show you an example of a listing, we really just look at the title here, which you can see is optimized heavily for appearance in search, and tags on the listing. We're not using any of this rich data that's in the description, and that's mostly just an artifact of how our search engine was developed over time. Basically what we want to do is get people to provide us the most important pieces and not have to parse all of this text in the ranking algorithm. We want to basically pull it out ahead of time on the listing so that we are only indexing the most important pieces of information, and that'll also help with the size of our search index. So CrowdFlower is helping to bootstrap the system. We're going to be using the labels provided by CrowdFlower as training data, and then using CrowdFlower continuously to sort of supervise our model over time as we learn these different attributes.
So Jamie, I'm going to channel a question that customers ask me all the time, which is, how did you come up with the list of options? So, we've hired 2 taxonomists, 2 library scientists to basically have a lot of industry experience. Jenny Benevento, our lead taxonomist, has worked at Sears, the AP. She worked at Wolfram Alpha. And it's sort of her job to nerd out on taxonomies. So we look at Etsy specific data. So we pull top searches for each of these categories. So we look at what are the top 20,000 queries, and we'll sample from that. That returned a significant amount of jewelry, or have a high affinity to jewelry. And it's really easy to see from that people tend to like to use color, material, gemstone, birthstones are popular. So we're looking at our query data, and then we're also looking at basically what filters are provided elsewhere on other e-commerce sites. We know that people shopping on Etsy aren't exclusively shopping on Etsy. They're not shopping in a vacuum. So we want to make sure that the metaphors that we're using are understandable to somebody who might also be shopping on Macy's or shopping at Target, shopping on Amazon. That's really interesting. So Andy, do you do a similar thing at Adobe where you try to pull out topics to help people refine their queries like that?
We're in kind of a unique situation with the image content. The example I've got is our version of that. I think we don't actually have quite the taxonomic navigation that Etsy has in the stock experience.
Got it. So it's a little more freeform then?
Yes. And in fact, we'll talk about deep learning and how we use crowdsourcing to help us with a similar use case, which is essentially generating good descriptions for our content so that we can offer a better search experience.
In fact, maybe we should jump to that now, sir. I'll go to. So we had a section on kind of ranking features, and here Andy had a really interesting example of using machine learning to improve search. In fact, deep learning. So Andy, maybe you want to walk us through that?
Sure. So deep learning is a concurrent a neural network, a hybrid ensemble kind of learning system that's all the rage. Lots of good academic and open source tools to do that. Interesting in the case of Adobe Stock, the micro site photography marketplaces were actually described a decade ago as one of the first notions of crowdsourcing. So essentially people from all around the world are uploading their photos and tagging them, putting keywords on them, and then marketplaces exist where people can come and buy those photos. And so what we've now done is with over 50 million contents and over 50,000 labels, we've applied deep learning to essentially build this visual recognition system that can label images. So for instance, this peanut picture was labeled as shell by our deep learner. And so we've trained this deep learner on the labeled data from our photographic contributors, and now we can recognize shells automatically on any new image that comes in. So we've used crowdsourcing to help us understand variations on that algorithm, as well as to prune the training data. So one of the things we discovered was that our contributors had tagged colors in photos, and deep learning is really kind of overkill for describing colors, right? You can do that with simple pixel analysis. And we also learned from crowdsourcing that our accuracy in identifying colors was pretty low. So one of the iterations we did with this was to remove colors from the deep learning vocabulary set. And then we take these auto tags, as we call them, and introduce them into the ranking process to help us understand the relative importance of different labels, as well as potentially to identify labels which are inappropriate. In the future, we're going to be able to do things like enumerate how many of the objects are in the picture. So there's 3 shells or 1 shell. And then potentially even understand the overlap of multiple images. So bird in a tree, right? So the machine learned vision system will actually identify the bird and where it is, and identify the tree and where it is, and we can actually detect that those 2 boxes are overlapping, and know that bird on a tree is a really appropriate label for this.
Wow, that sounds super cool. I'm surprised that color is difficult. That seems so clear.
It's not difficult. I think it's just not what the deep learner was designed to do, right?
I see.
49,500 of the tags are about objects and moods and seasons and holidays, and so color is it actually learns the wrong thing for color, right? It thinks color is a kind of subjective description rather than a explicit thing.
Interesting. So it's interesting how you both at Adobe and at Etsy are taking data that's collected from users and then using crowdsourcing and human judgment to kind of refine it or turn it in, like make it more specific to the type of learning you're doing, and then running algorithms on top of it. Do you think that's kind of a general flow that you've seen throughout your career, or is there something about what you're doing that makes that especially relevant?
I mean, I think one thing that is true of both of our situations is we have this large corpus of semi-structured information, and there, weren't very many rules around how that information was input. So, somebody working with a different data set might have a lot more stringent rules, or far fewer rules when the document is created. So. You might not have to do so much quality assurance if you're looking at, say, a Zillow listing where the exact parameters of the house are like very, very laid out for someone searching. You're coming in with a lot of structured data if somebody is putting it in. Whereas in both of our cases, well, Etsy is like sort of structured. We do have the category system. Most of what users are inputting is incredibly free-form. And Andy, it sounds like with these images, the tags that people were attaching at the outset were very, very free-form.
Yeah. I think
so it's not as unstructured as like a web page, but it's not as structured as a strict form.
Agreed. And Lucas, I think the pattern of getting small judgments from essentially, meandering between worker judgment and machine learning and worker judgment and machine learning is an emerging pattern. I saw a lot of that kind of work at ACM Chi this summer, and seeing a lot of it doing reviews for Human Computation conference in Austin.
Yeah, I think I've seen it a lot in a lot of shopping recommender systems. Also, a lot of content creation. A lot of people moving from sort of this model of curation to machine learning, where you have a lot of humans in the loop early on. That's how you bootstrap it, and then you try to extrapolate features of the humans into an ongoing system with some level of QA in the middle.
Right. So essentially letting machines do what they do best and humans do what they do best, and kind of targeting the humans, not just trying to label everything like you might have done 20 years ago, but trying to just have the humans label the interesting or difficult examples. I should say we see a ton of that and across our customers, and I agree that seems like a real emerging trend in data science and machine learning. And so I realized that we are at 9:45, so I want to thank everybody for attending the webinar, and thank our experts at Adobe and Etsy for sharing such insights. And then I want to hand it back to Bill to switch to a Q&A format. And Jamie and Andy, feel free to jump in and answer whatever questions you think are relevant to you.
Well, hey, Lucas, Andy, Jamie, thanks so much for that excellent presentation. I certainly learned a lot. So let's get started with today's Q&A session. And I want to thank the audience for their participation. We've had a lot of questions that have come in during the presentation, and we'll do our best to get through them all during the time remaining. And during this Q&A session, I'll leave up this screen with contact information for Lucas, Andy, and Jamie, if you'd like to contact them after today's webinar. So let's get started. And let's try maybe to stick with the original structure of the 4 topics that you were going to cover, and let's start with measurement. So Lucas, maybe you'd like to start with this. In measurement, how should you sample queries for measurement, and how much data is it necessary to collect?
Well, I'd be interested to hear from Andy and Jamie on this. So, I think this is a question that customers always ask me is how much data do I need to get started to testing algorithms on human labeled data? And so I'll say the answer I give, but I'm curious if Andy and Jamie, if you agree with this. So I typically say a good place to get started is around 1,000 queries and then pulling about 10 results per query, because that's kind of what we've seen successful customers do right at the beginning when they just want to try out human labels and starting to get a little more principled with their approach to relevance. But Andy, you talked about this quite a bit earlier. Do you have any best practices? You've kind of gone into startups quite a bit where you were kind of the first person doing this. Do you have a playbook that you draw from?
No, I think the critical piece, I just think of this as a measure like any other, and the question is, at what point do you get reasonably stable results? A simple way to prove that you've spent your money effectively is divide your results in half or in fourths and see if they're stable, right? And if they are, then maybe you can get away with a little less data.
Got it. That's a good.
But generally, it depends upon the volume of search queries you have. Kind of 500 is the minimum set that I ever think about.
Okay. Well, thanks for those
answers. From a measurement point of view.
Jamie, did you want to add something?
No, I think that makes sense to me.
Okay, good. So let's try and move around a little bit so we get some questions from each category. And perhaps the most interesting thing to me about your presentation was this concept of human labeled data and how it gets integrated into the overall improvement of the site. So let's start with something simple. How do you combine click data and human data?
I think, like most simple questions, that's actually a very complicated question. So right now, most of our effort at Etsy with human labeled data is they're actually sort of happening in two different camps. So the human labeled data is being used to basically lay a foundation of information for the for our use in search. So it's happening at the foundational side, whereas a lot of the clicks are sort of coming in after the fact. That's just our current use case. I think in the past we've also used human label data to sort of uncover sticky areas where maybe we didn't understand why a query was or a specific ranking was failing, or to, like Andy said before, basically vet whether or not a shift in the ranking would be viable or not. Not outside of click data, we're also using human labeling to basically help with relationship modeling. So our current model for trying to label attributes onto listings is trying to basically look at the text and do some sort of really rudimentary natural language processing to understand whether or not an item has that attribute. The labeling in this case is being used to basically correct our ranking or our labeling so that we can improve the model over time.
Okay.
So in this, it'd be we have a version of the model. We put it out to the labelers. They correct it. That information gets fed back in to the model. We kick out another version. The labelers correct it, and we improve the accuracy of the model over time.
All right. So I think I've got this categorized in the right way. The thing that I did not hear you talk about were recommender systems. Do you use recommenders to help shape the data that's eventually searched, or is that outside the scope of what we're talking about?
I can talk about that as well. The team at Etsy that works on our recommender systems and the team that works on ranking work very, very closely together. For the most part, recommendations and ranking are treated totally separately. So recommendations can be based on a user, based on an item, based on some other aspect of the user that isn't specific to the user, so a user's location, a user's browser, etc. We're generally keeping these things separated as sort of like recommendation systems happen first and are specific to the user, and there's sort of a separation of church and state. But we have, in the past, used a user-based recommendation system. So we look at your browsing history, your purchasing history, and we find items that are good for you. And layered that into the ranking as sort of like a post-ranking step. So in that case, what we were doing was boosting the items that we thought were most likely to be purchased by that specific user or most fitting to that user's taste in the search results if they were already present. So it was sort of a post-ranking step that used the recommendation system to re-rank the results for a specific user.
Well, Jamie, that's really interesting. So you decided. Sorry, could I? I'm just curious. You decided to stop doing that?
We haven't stopped. We just sort of shifted development. Basically, it's sort of a question of like, what kind of users do you want to optimize for? Do you want to optimize for the people who are really, really engaged, or the people who you want to become engaged? The people that we had data on were already really engaged. These recommendations were already available to them in another place. So there are many paths forward for that. We can expand the set of recommendations. The recommendations get less are of less of a quality over time, or we could focus on matching the items to the query as opposed to matching the items to the user. So we decided for the time being to work on better fitting the results to the specific query than fitting the results to the user. So you have like a one.
I'll chime in that,
sort of
that my experience is that optimizing for contextualization, which is the component of personalization that's about you today, so the query, is generally significantly easier and more lucrative at stage 1 than individualization, which is the component of personalization, which is, I know you because I've been studying you for 6 months and you've spent a lot of time on my site. So I always start with the query and then go to the user with regard to smarts.
Terrific. Oh, thanks for those great answers. Andy, I think I understand the answer to this question, but I was particularly intrigued by your use of deep learning in this. Can you explain a little bit about the feedback loop between having now human scored some of these searches and then how you feed that back into your deep learning algorithm to refresh or update it?
Sure. I think, and this chimes a little bit in on the question about how do you combine training data or label data and click data. In the case of the deep learning example, one of the things that came out of that deep learning is a confidence score. And so a lot of what we're using, a core outcome of the judgment process was to get thresholds on the confidence score. So we haven't actually figured out how to use the negative data from the human judgment to provide feedback to the deep learning system. We are actually, because we have a lot more of it, we're actually now trying to figure out how to use the click data to essentially give positive feedback to the deep learner.
Okay.
There's always an interesting story in machine learning in general about the relative value of positive and negative data. Both have their place, and overdoing one or the other can definitely get you in trouble.
Okay. Oh, thank you for that great answer. Let me move down to your third major point, which was about the search filtering user interface. What are the best practices for optimizing search filtering?
So I hesitate to say best practices, but I can talk about some of the hang-ups that we experienced at Etsy. So one problem that we had with looking at behavioral data was that if you aren't showing somebody good search filters, they won't use them. They won't trust them, and that doesn't necessarily indicate that the person doesn't need search filters. It means that you're not providing good search filters for them. So this was sort of like you could look at the data and say filters aren't important, but it's hard to say whether filters are not important generally or whether your filters are not important because you're not doing a good job of it. So this was a case where user research actually pointed us to the search filtering not being sufficient, not that it wasn't important. So what we think about now when we're providing search filters, and this is an ongoing sort of trial and error experience, is we want to provide the filters that most relate to the query and break the results up in a meaningful way. So we don't want to, if you've searched for jewelry, it is a bad experience to show you a filter that says jewelry because you've already given us that information. So we want to show filters that break up the jewelry result set into meaningful components. We might also want to give you other ways to inflect on the results. So we can look at what are the top filters returned for, what are the top attributes returned for the jewelry query, and show you things just based on facet count is a really easy way to start. And from there, look at what is most engaged with and maybe rearrange the filters based on the click data once we've sort of bootstrapped it by just looking at what's available in the result set.
Well, Lucas, Andy,
I'll chime in that you also want to make sure that you move to session-level search success metrics rather than page level. And so the way to think about this is you want to measure the share of search intents that were successful and how long it took. And that time measurement can be really valuable. Just talk about a search intent. It's a deep topic, but I'll give you two examples. You could do the query banana and go to page 3 and click, or they could do the query banana and then refine it to banana split and then click. Both of those are kind of comparable levels of work and probably maybe even comparable levels of time for the user. So how are you going to understand the difference between those two? Because as you improve refinement opportunities, you're going to get more of the second case than the first.
Okay. All right. Well, Lucas, Andy, Jamie, thank you so much for those great answers to some very good questions. And for those of you that asked questions that weren't answered today, we'll be sending all those unanswered questions to Lucas, Andy, and Jamie and the CrowdFlower team so they can follow up with you after today's webinar. Now, I have just a few quick announcements. If you'd please mark your calendars for July 26th, that's our next DSC webinar, which will be faster and richer self-service analytics with Salesforce data and visualizations, and that'll be sponsored by Alteryx. Also, remember that today's taping will be available for on-demand viewing later today, and you can find that on the homepage of datasciencecentral.com in the webinar tab, and that's located at the top of our landing page. Well, this brings today's webinar to a close, and I'd like to thank our audience for their attendance and thoughtful questions, and a special thanks again to CrowdFlower for their sponsorship, and our speakers today, Lucas, Andy, and Jamie, for their insights into today's topic. My name is Bill Voorhees. I'm very pleased to have been your host for today's event. I look forward to seeing you all again on July 26th. Have a great day.